Hi everyone, welcome back. We're looking at the essay called Beyond the Reality Principle. It starts on page 58 and continues up through 74. The real action for us begins on page 65. The section titled Freud's Revolutionary Method. Let's read the first few paragraphs together, and I'll kind of walk you through some of what's happening here. The first sign of an attitude of submission to reality in Freud's work was the recognition that since the majority of psychical phenomena in man are apparently related to a social relations function, there is no reason to exclude the pathway which provides the most usual access to it, the subject's own account of these phenomena. So what you have here is something psychological and sociological coming together in each human that makes the linguistic part of being human important. Now here's how I get that. The majority of psychical phenomena, that's stuff that is occurring inside us, psychological stuff, is related to a social relations function. That's what's happening outside, the relationships that we're in, friends, family, neighbors, and the like. Now, what Freud knew and what Lacan accepts here is that all individual psychology is social psychology. We are made from the relationships we have with other people. Our interiors are shot through with our relationships with others in the exterior environment. So what we have are little societies inside each of us. Our minds are populated, our selves are populated by all our interactions that we have with other people. And what Lacan says, and this is his great addition, now we have to account for the subject's own speech with regards to these phenomena. So Freud really understood the link between the psychological and the sociological, the interior and the exterior. He also understood that it was important to focus on what patients say. Lacan is here adding to that. He's building on this idea by focusing on the subject's own account of these phenomena. Now you can scroll down a little bit here, and you can see on page 65, he brings up the imaginary in the next paragraph. Consequently, he says, the symptom which has a real signification cannot be psychological except, quote, in appearance. And it is distinguished from the ordinary register of psychical life by some discordant feature in which its serious character manifests itself. The best way to read this is to say that the symptom appears in the subject's speech as a signifier. It's a signifier. It has a real signification. Now we get to the good stuff, the next paragraph. Freud understood that it was this very choice that made the patient's account worthless. The patient's speech is somehow worthless, and yet this is precisely where the value in that speech lies. Pay attention. If we wish to recognize a reality that is proper to psychical reactions, we must not begin by choosing among them. We must begin by no longer choosing. Now, the way I read that is to say, we must listen to everything that a patient says when they communicate to us in the room, assuming you're the doctor here. Which is to say, you're no longer choosing what's the important stuff, what's the valuable stuff. And usually in the case of regular human speech, we choose against the stuff that we think is, quote, worthless. But let's see if this plays out. In order to gauge their efficacy, we must respect their succession. Now, what I think he means by that is the doctor in this case, the analyst, the psychoanalyst, by respecting their succession means that they are just simply listening to the flow of the patient's speech and noting the sequence of events that come up when somebody, say, tells them about a dream or the like. Certainly there is no question of restoring the chain of those reactions through the narrative, But the very moment in which the account is given, here we are back to the patient's speech, their communicative practice, can constitute a significant fragment of the chain, on condition that we demand that the patient provide the entire text and that we free him from the chains of narrative. And these two phrases are important. The entire text and we free him. Because the next paragraph gets into some of the technical moves that are going to be happening in analysis. Let's read through them together. This is the way in which what we might call analytic experience is constituted. Its first condition is formulated in a law of non-omission, which promotes everything that is self-explanatory. The everyday and the ordinary promotes all of this to the status of interesting that is usually reserved for the remarkable, but it is incomplete without the second condition. So this first condition, the law of non-omission, it means don't leave anything out. Tell the whole truth. If you know that expression, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Here it is, don't leave anything out, don't omit anything. Everything that happens in analytic experience, the everyday and the ordinary, is just as interesting as the stuff that seems super remarkable. And what psychoanalysis teaches us is that ordinary communicative practice is in fact more remarkable than the extraordinary use of language that we sometimes see. So don't leave anything out would be the first piece of advice if you wanted to become a psychoanalyst. You listen to everything, and the stuff that you think is worthless turns out to be the most interesting. Law number 2, the law of non-systematization, which, positing incoherence as a condition of analytic experience, presumes significant all the dross of mental life, not only the representations in which scholastic psychology sees only non-meaning, dream scenarios, presentiments, daydreams, and confused or lucid delusions, but also the phenomena that are not even granted a civil status in it, so to speak, since they are altogether negative, slips of the tongue and bungled actions. So the law of non-systematization would basically say here that incoherence is the name of the game. A lot of times when people speak, especially when they're talking about themselves and things that matter to them and things that don't matter to them, it's not systematic speech. It's not organized like the essay that we're reading here. It's disjointed, people are all over the place. They're chattering about this and chattering about that. So don't look for systematic speech. Listen for incoherence as a condition of analytic experience. Now, what does that mean? It means speech proceeds oftentimes like a dream, where one thing leads to the other and there are tons of non sequiturs and things just don't seem to hang together. The daydream is just as relevant as your focused moment in an afternoon's work session. When you feel confused or lucid, even delusional, this is ripe stuff. So it's, in other words, when you're saying everything without being limited by the bounds of coherent speech, cogent discourse, when you can say what's on your mind without having to be all eloquent. What's interesting too is this is usually a standard for a good relationship. You know you're in a good relationship when you can, quote, be yourself. And what that usually means is you don't have to be all put together all the time. You can tell your partner anything. There's the law of non-omission. You don't need to omit anything about your experience. And you don't always have to be put together. You don't always have to be perfect, as you may have tried to be on your first date. Here's the law of non-systematization. You don't have to be all coherent and cogent and coherent. Key for this stuff. The same is true in analytic experience that you would want in a good interpersonal relationship. Final move. Let us note that these two laws, the law of non-omission and the law of non-systematization, or better, the rules of analytic experience, the first of which was isolated by Pichon, appear in Freud's work in the form of a single rule that he formulated in accordance with the concept prevailing at the time, the law of free association. So what Freud does is he combines the law of non-omission and the law of non-systematization into a single law here at the top of page 66, the law of free association. Free association. What are we after here?